Good afternoon to our CLA family members, clients, community partners, and friends. Welcome back to our live stream. We sincerely hope that all of you are staying safe and healthy at this time. ERC has been all the rage. So today we are going to talk about what we are seeing as we see people wrapping up their Q1 2021 refund claims, and some people are gearing up to try to take advantage of Q2 2021 ERC credits rather than having to amend. So we've got Christine DeMena with us with our ERC team to go over the most frequently asked questions that we're seeing. So welcome back, Christine.
Thanks, Leslie.
We also have Matthew Ramberin here to talk about PPP forgiveness and what you should be thinking about as we're coming out of the covered period for second draw loans. And also we've got some people that are racing to the finish line for those first draw loans. So welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
So before we dive in today, we do have some housekeeping we want to cover. We do have the ability for live Q&A during our session today. In order to participate, you have to register and log in using the links below me. Those questions are going to appear, and you have the ability to like those to move those up in priority so that we can address them. We have moderators that are standing by, and they are ready to engage and interact with you. We also do want to let you know of a couple special events that we have coming up that are scrolling below us. In particular, on June 29th, we have a Sage Intact webinar series. This one will focus on allocation groups to streamline month-end allocations. So you don't want to miss that. And of course, in addition to webinars, be on the lookout for articles, white papers, and additional guidance that we're constantly providing. And as always, contact your CLA relationship because we absolutely want to talk to you. So with that, I want to start with Christine today. Christine, ERC has been hot, hot, hot. And I know you guys have a new article coming out on ERC as we get into Q2 here on some frequently asked topics. And I think we should just start here with a little bit of a refresh, if you will, because the Consolidated Appropriations Act really broadened the applicability of the retention credit. So that's why it's so hot, is that so many eligible employers have this big potential for savings. So many people eligible, lots of questions. I think it would be good if you could just refresh. What are some of the key things that we need to know in 2021 as a baseline for the retention credit?
Absolutely. So in 2021, there were some changes to the retention credit compared to 2020. The 2021 Consolidated Appropriations Act had one big retroactive change where originally an organization was not allowed to use the ERC if it had received PPP funding. But now for both 2020 and 2021, an organization can claim the ERC even if they do have PPP funding, whether it's PPP 1 or round 2, as long as the payroll dollars are not being used for both the credit and for PPP forgiveness. And a quick little refresh on the 2021 credit, it is a little bit easier to claim in some respects. The threshold for the gross receipts reduction is now a greater than 20% threshold compared to 2019, whereas in 2020, you needed a 50% threshold. You also still can use the full or partial government shutdown to qualify as well.
Yeah, those are some good reminders. And I think those changes are what really opened the floodgates, because so many people were disqualified before because of the PPP. And then that revenue threshold change was the other big game changer. So that was a big deal. So, I can't believe that here it is, almost the end of June. Summer is flying by, sadly, because I love summer. But as we close in on the end of Q2, I know that some people have questions as to what are the benefits of just claiming the ERC on a timely filed 941 if they can get ahead of that rather than doing it on an amended one.
Yeah, so if you're able to claim it on your timely filed 941, we would expect you to see your refund come back a lot quicker. Compared to doing an amended 941X form, which is a paper filed form, we have seen the timely filed returns coming back in about 1/3 of the time. However, as you mentioned, we are coming to the end of Q2, and many organizations have PPP round 2 loans, and quarter 2 is really right in the middle of their covered period. So there are some reasons where you may want to hold off and not claim that retention credit on a timely filed return. First, guidance related to the nuances about how you can qualify remains limited. So the IRS has released 2 different notices, Notice 2021-20 and 2021-23, and they do provide a lot of helpful information about how to test for a partial shutdown, how to calculate your head count, forgiveness, interplay with your PPP loan, but many questions are still unanswered. So if future guidance is released, it's possible that that credit would have to be returned along with interest and penalties. But really, the major discussion point right now that we're having with clients is when you have that second draw PPP loan, you may not know which payroll dollars you need for forgiveness. And PPP forgiveness with a dollar for dollar return should really be your number one. So even with the extended covered period, that Q2 of 2021 is really the heart of your PPP forgiveness.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we've got to weigh, do I have a second draw PPP loan? If you don't, maybe some of that speed makes sense. But, I think the flip side is if we've got sometimes the gift of time, I like to call it, and even if it's going to take us a little while to get that refund, we can do some planning with what we're going to do with that capital once it comes in. Maybe we do some modeling of business planning and financial planning and say, when I get that refund, how do I plan to deploy that capital and use it in my trade or business? So think about that and contact your advisor and work through some strategies with that. So those are just some great things, I think, reminders for us to weigh. And so, Christine, you talked about at the beginning when you were comparing and contrasting 2021 to 2020 that there are some different qualifications for the credits over those 2 years. Can you talk about some of those nuances and a little bit about the differences in eligibility for 2021?
Absolutely. So some of the main differences are, one is the classification between a small and a large employer. When you're a large employer, you can only claim the credit for wages paid for employees who are not providing services. That threshold in 2020 was 100 full-time employees, and that count is always based off of your calendar 2019 year. In 2021, that threshold now increases to 500. So a lot of those companies that had over 100 full-time but still were small businesses can now qualify as a small employer, which means they can take that credit for all qualified wages paid during the period they're eligible. On the eligibility side, you still need to have either a full or partial suspension due to a valid government order. And in that case, you can claim the credits for the period defined within that order, or you need to have a reduction in gross receipts compared to that 2019 benchmark period. So the Consolidated Appropriations Act also updated the language from the CARES Act, where it changed that reduction in gross receipts from greater than 50% to greater than 20% for 2021. And you're still comparing to that 2019 benchmark period. So for Q1 of 2021, you are looking at Q1 of 2019 to identify that greater than 20% decrease. There is language where you can also use an alternative prior quarter. So the prior quarter to the one you're looking at in 2021. For example, for first quarter, you could look at Q4 of 2020 compared to Q4 of 2019. One of the biggest questions I continue to see is, does that mean I automatically qualify for Q2 2021? So in Q2 2021, if you qualified using Q1 gross receipts compared to Q1 2019 gross receipts, you can use that to qualify for Q2. If you used Q4 2020 to qualify for Q1 2021, which didn't qualify in its own, that does not roll forward to Q2. You'd have to requalify in Q2. So a little bit complicated, but definitely a lot of opportunities to claim multiple quarters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're in one of those scenarios, we definitely just want to make sure you contact us and do some planning and map that out. So I think another topic that I think we see daily is ownership rules. So we have a lot of privately held businesses. A lot of times they're family-owned businesses or have closely held structures. And we get the question all the time, can an S corporation owner, for example, claim the retention credit on their own wages? So I don't think that's a black and white answer either. What do you think?
This can also get very complicated and convoluted, and it's really dependent first on the percentage of ownership of each owner. Then it is greater complicated by relationships. So if the owners are related parties, either directly or by attribution, and own greater than 50% in that corporation, you cannot claim the credit for their wages. You can have owners who are unrelated that hold 50% or less that can claim the credit. So you really have to look at the entire ownership structure and identify those relationships between not just that company, but other commonly owned companies as well. So an easy example, if you have a husband and wife owning an S corporation with an unrelated shareholder, and they all own 33%, you would have the attribution rules apply to the husband and wife, making their total 66%, which is over the 50% threshold, and therefore their wages would be ineligible for the credit. However, that third unrelated owner could still be eligible to generate the credit on their wages.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And I think, what you just illustrated is it depends and it's complicated. So this is another really good area to phone a friend and get some help on. And so I think you just highlighted some good planning opportunities there. And speaking of that, what other key provisions should we be aware of as we think holistically about taking advantage of this and other economic relief?
So the ERC, it operates like any other payroll-related credits. You have to add that credit amount back to the wage expense adjustment to your income for tax purposes. And it's very similar to the treatment for other employment tax credits, including the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, which we refer to as WOTC, and the employer credit for paid family and medical leave. But really, lastly, my favorite topic is double dipping. So there is no rule prohibiting you from using the same pay period payroll for a variety of different credit and relief options, but you really should be going in and separating and segregating out each payroll dollar, which dollar is being used for which program, so that it's very clear that you're not double dipping between the different programs. And really in your mind, picture each dollar being tagged for that program. So if 50% of payroll is being used for PPP forgiveness, the other 50% in theory is available to use for other programs that the organization is qualifying for. The next thing is really prioritizing all of those dollars. PPP forgiveness is dollar for dollar. Next would be your FFCRA dollars, and then you would look at the ERC and WOTC and those other programs. And it can get quite complicated, and there's a lot of planning that needs to be done. So here's another opportunity to get with your advisor to do some planning and really determine the best use of those payroll dollars to maximize the organization's benefit across all of those relief programs.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you can even look at with PPP, not only how you stretch the covered period, but are there also opportunities to pull in maybe 40% worth of additional costs that are non-payroll so that you can stretch your payroll spend for retention credit too. So lots of opportunities for planning, I think. So Christine, those are really great insights, and we're going to keep you around for questions because I know that we are getting plenty of questions. And I'm going to pivot now to PPP and welcome back Matthew. So Matthew, it is great to have you. And we are getting a lot of questions right now on PPP. We're nearing the end of the covered period for the second draw, but we've had a lot of people that are still waiting 10 months as well, and so filing. And so hot topics and questions we're getting is, when should a borrower file for forgiveness? And we're seeing banks. I've even had a client this week get a notice that they've got payment due. So it appears some borrowers have time to file, but can you describe this 10-month requirement to file and what people are up against here?
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Glad to be back. Borrowers, as you mentioned, are receiving notifications from their lenders that it's time to file for the PPP loan forgiveness. But as you mentioned, there could be some potential time lapses there, and time actually could be on the borrower's side, depending on their time frame for the covered period. So let me do this. Let me take a step back and let's look at sort of the history of this program, and then we can kind of talk about where we are today. So taking a step back, we're going to kind of talk about the Flexibility Act of 2020, which occurred back in June of last year. And that act extended the deferral period from 6 months to 10 months. The extension goes on to the date that the SBA remits the borrower's loan forgiveness amount to the lender, or if the borrower does not apply for forgiveness, the extension will expire 10 months after the end of the borrower's loan forgiveness covered period. So previously, as I mentioned, before the Flexibility Act, the forgiveness deferral period expired after 6 months, which will be noted on some borrowers' promissory notes. So your lender agreement might show the 6-month period, when in reality, with the Flexibility Act of 2020, it automatically extended that period now to 10 months. So lenders were required last year, I would say back in June, July through August, to notify their borrowers of that extension and making it automatic. So in most instances, borrowers should not have renegotiated or updated any of the promissory notes to amend or to apply this new guidance. So that's sort of the background, right? So now let's kind of talk about where we are today. So the SBA allows the borrower to sort of elect their covered period. They've got between 8 and 24 weeks. And based on that time frame, upon the end of that covered period, they then have a 10-month period to apply for forgiveness before any payment or principal becomes due. So I'll give you a couple scenarios here. Let's suppose a borrower applies for forgiveness before the forgiveness deferral period date, so that 10-month at the end of the covered period. In that case, no payment of interest and principal is going to be due until the SBA makes a decision by remitting the loan to the lender and then forgiving that and satisfying that obligation. And we'll look at now the flip side. So suppose the borrower does not file for its forgiveness application by the deferral period, that 10-month window after the end of the covered period, 8 or up to 24 weeks. In that case, the borrower should expect to receive a communication from the lender, and that's kind of what we're seeing now, requesting both interest and principal payments to commence. And assuming no loan forgiveness, they'll need to start making those payments. Now, we do believe, and based on the rules and what we've read in the guidelines, that a borrower can actually file for forgiveness up to 5 years. So under that Flexibility Act, the program extended from 2 months to 5 years. Before it was also that 6-month window. I'm sorry, I said 2 months, 2 years to 5 years for the term of the loan, and then the window was 6 months now to 10 months. So in theory, you can technically file for forgiveness up to 5 years, but during that time, you're going to need to start making principal and interest payments. And obviously, it's not really a preferential or a good option from a cash flow perspective. But if you're talking about ERC and other opportunities and other programs, it might make sense to sometimes take a step back and see if there's opportunity there. Back to you, Leslie.
Yeah, great advice. So lots of options here, but I think if you're in that situation and you're getting notices or nearing, 8, 9 months, it is time to start talking to someone and getting some help and weighing some options. So I think that's really good advice. So another question I think is, how should a borrower address a bank that's asking them to file prior to that 10-month deferral period? Because a lot of people are starting to get these notices.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I have always said this, work with your lender to identify the appropriate timeline. So look at your covered period, identify that timeline, and work with them. Though the SBA released guidance on the forgiveness deferral period, which we just addressed, we have to remember that the loan is with the lender. So the lender actually has a little bit of power concerning the timeline that they want, but at the same time, they should also be reasonable with their borrowers. From what we're seeing, lenders, they need time to review these forgiveness applications, sort of do the blocking and tackling before it goes to the SBA. And then upon the SBA doing their review, if there's any communications or back and forth, the lender is going to be in contact with the borrower. So in most cases, you are seeing a lot of lenders sort of requesting this a little bit sooner. So just to kind of reiterate, the best advice here is really just work with the lender, talk to them about the timeline. If you feel there's going to be a shortfall in that timeline, communicate with them and let them know. So this way, if they can amend or do anything to help, to help you through this challenging time, maybe they'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think the other thing is, we've had several people that have had larger loans, ones over 2 million. And I think we're finally starting to see some movement on those loans that are 2 million and over. So can you talk about forgiveness for loans over 2 million and what we're beginning to experience in that space?
Leslie, that is correct. That's actually great news. Loans over 2 million, we are seeing movement and forgiveness. I would say rapid movement. I actually have a few clients that we filed about a month ago and they've already received forgiveness, and some of those loans were fairly heavy. So I will say if you've been waiting patiently, continue the course, stay connected with your lender. They have insight as to the status of your loan, and they should be able to provide any updates as necessary. In some situations, loans may have hold codes that need to be addressed before the forgiveness is achieved. So once again, work with your lender on those. Also, don't forget that loans over 2 million also have a requirement for first draw borrowers that if they have 2 million plus with either one entity or multiple affiliates, that they have to file the 3509 and the 3510. So a little insight on that is that I have been seeing some follow-up questions by both the lender and the SBA concerning some of the responses on that form. One that came back was excess distributions in excess of tax estimated payments. In all situations, the client and the borrower were able to respond to the lender, to the SBA, with an appropriate response. And I have not seen any situations where the borrower did not get 100% forgiveness or partial forgiveness. In all situations, they've been approved. So, they are doing some spot checking. They are going to ask some additional questions. I would say be prepared, be proactive, have that 3509, 3510 drafted in advance to them requesting it for the loans over 2 million. And if there's something on that 3509 and 3510 that maybe there's a perception issue or it needs some additional clarity, just be prepared to have that support in the background if it is challenged or questions.
Yeah, I think you're right. Being proactive with that is really important because it's a very quick turnaround. So that's really sound advice there. So staying on the topic of loans over 2 million, we've got, including those that have affiliates who received those over 2 million or more, they have to check a box basically and indicate that. And then they've got to submit 3509 or 3510, as you mentioned. But we know that some industries are exempt from affiliation rules, and that eliminates the need possibly to respond to questionnaires. So let's maybe refresh on which industries are exempt from those affiliation rules.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take another step back in time so we can talk about the affiliate rules and the application of those rules. The SBA makes it clear that it's the borrower's responsibility to determine affiliates. And in doing so, they provided the 4 tests. So just quickly, affiliation based on ownership, affiliation arising under stock options, convertible securities, or agreements to merge, affiliation based on management, and affiliation based on identity of interest. We're not going to go into depth on those. Reach out to us if you've got questions. We can help you through it. But that's a little bit of background on the affiliate rules and who's responsible. Now, in situations, and I've seen this quite often, in situations where the borrower may not have identified affiliates on their original application, and the SBA, through maybe other information such as TINs or EINs or tax filings, determine that there are affiliates, I've seen them request additional support in the form of a 3511, the form it's called the affiliation worksheet. And in all instances, same thing. I've seen where the client or the borrower has responded to the questionnaire and was able to satisfy, whatever additional affiliates needed to be disclosed or maybe missed on the initial application. That also kind of reverts back to the last question. These are things that could potentially hold up the forgiveness for loans over 2 million or even some smaller loans as well. So that's a little bit of background on who's responsible for determining affiliation and potential requirement if the SBA discovers that there could be affiliation, how to resolve that. So what we'll do is we'll jump into the exceptions as to who is accepted or exempt from the affiliation, and we can kind of talk about whether you need to select that checkbox, the 2 million and up. So the guidance confirms that the affiliation rule exceptions or exemptions and waivers are waived for certain industries. So businesses with fewer than 500 employees that have a North American, the NAICS Industry Classification System code 72, that's for restaurants, hospitality, hotels. They're exempt from the affiliate rules. You would look at the affiliates on a per location basis up to 500 employees per physical location. The next one is franchisees assigned a franchise identification code or identifier code by the SBA. This was a little bit tricky, and I had to dig in to find some guidance on this. But the SBA has what's called a franchise directory, listing specific names, brands already approved and updated. And I checked as of June 17th, 2021. So if you feel that you are part of a franchise, you can take a look at that list. It's on the SBA's website, and if needed, we can also share the link with you as well. You can check to see if your business is considered an affiliate, a franchise, and then it would exempt them from the affiliation rules. Finally, there is also businesses that receive financial assistance from a company licensed under Section 301 of the Small Business Investment Act, and I think that was back in 1958. Another research that I had to do. So this is a very dated act, but specifically within that act, it talks about SBICs, and that stands for Small Business Investment Companies. What an SBIC is, it's a privately owned managed investment fund that's licensed and regulated by the SBA. So an SBIC uses its own capital plus funds borrowed with an SBA guarantee to make equity and debt investments in qualifying small businesses. So some minority-owned businesses in hard-hit areas. If you're receiving funding from one of these programs, you now also become exempt under the affiliation rules. There's actually one final thing is faith-based organizations are also exempt from affiliation rules if the relationship is based on religious teachings or belief, or otherwise constitutes a part of the exercise of religion. So if you meet any of those exceptions, you will look at each entity or physical location as a separate entity, and if under 2 million, you'll not be required to complete the loan necessity questionnaires or click that checkbox in the 3508 forgiveness application.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really complicated, right? I mean, that's really good advice. I mean, you've just walked through how cumbersome and complicated those affiliation rules can be. And I think it's important to understand which camp you fall into and then to be prepared if you do need to check that box. So understand if you need to affiliate and then how you need to report and be ready to report. Well, I do want to take a few questions because we have so many questions rolling in, which is fantastic. We love questions. So the first one that I do want to take is for you, Matthew, and it's related to PPP expense tracking. So the question is, now that we've got flexibility between the 8-week and the 24-week covered period, do you have to, go the full 24 weeks, or if you have, let's say, 12 weeks and that covers you, can you stop there?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of analysis with clients and borrowers on when they should file for forgiveness. My best advice is go the full 24 weeks, because using the full 24 weeks, you know where to stop and where to start, right? You know how much you've spent in 24 weeks, and you can kind of back into, where you could probably stop. Maybe 12 weeks is efficient, is good or preferred, or 14 weeks, but you can kind of always work your way back. In conjunction with some of what Christine had mentioned, this is really a strategy surrounding a lot of the other programs, the ERC, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. If you plan to participate in those, there's no real rush to get that, especially on second draw, there's really no rush to try and get it filed as soon as possible. Maximize both opportunities. Use the 24-week window as an opportunity to see where you stand and then determine if ERC is applicable. Well, now I can back that out of my application and I can move forward. So that's my suggestion there.
Well, those are really good thoughts. We also have a retention credit question, Christine. So the question on retention credit is, when we're thinking about that, do we have to include PPP forgiveness in gross receipts for the retention credit when we're testing our receipts?
So notice 2021-20 actually defines gross receipts for the purpose of that test. And for a for-profit, it's under 448C of section 448C of the code. For a nonprofit, it's under section 6033. And in both cases, that would include the PPP forgiveness when it's recognized for tax purposes. So until the IRS comes out with any more guidance that says you don't have to include it, we do feel that it should be included in the same period that you're recognizing it for your tax purposes.
Great, that's really helpful. All right, we do have another ERC question. So you were so great at walking us through all the quarters. And so the question is, if you meet the gross receipts test for Q1 of 2021, do you automatically meet the test for the whole year or just for Q2?
So right now it's a one prior quarter look back. So if you met the test in Q1 using Q1 2021 gross receipts compared to Q1 2019 gross receipts, you can use that for Q2. Q3 and Q4, there hasn't been specific guidance released yet by the IRS. The last notice covered really Q1 and 2. Hopefully it is the same for the rest of the year when that guidance comes out, but it doesn't automatically qualify you for the whole year. The quarter prior to the quarter you're in has to qualify based on their own gross receipts, or you have to qualify based on your gross receipts in the specific quarter you're in. So potentially you could have a mix of those scenarios where you could qualify for all 4 quarters, but you can't use Q1 to qualify you for the entire year automatically.
Awesome. Great clarification there. All right, Matthew, we've got another PPP question. This one really kind of deals with timing of income recognition, so we can tag team this one if you want. And it deals with S corporations who receive PPP loan forgiveness and just when we might include that in tax exempt income if it's forgiven in 2021 and thoughts on that.
Sorry about that. The forgiveness itself is not taxable. So the timing of when it's recognized, I believe, would be, and Liz, I think you can correct me on this, but it would be in the period that it's forgiven. And on financials, it's sort of a little bit of a different analysis. We can talk about that if needed, but on the financials, you would get the expense in the year that it was incurred, and then when it's forgiven, you'll then have a gain on extinguishment of debt on your financials. That's non-taxable for tax purposes.
And that's generally right. That's the position that we've seen and taken too. So we haven't seen a lot of clear guidance from the IRS on this either. So right now, the conservative stance that we've taken is that definitely the year it's forgiven seems to be the right time to include that. Absent any additional guidance from the IRS, I think that's right. I do want to jump back to one other ERC question before we wrap up, and that is related to the S corporation owner. So let's say that we have a business that owns, they've got an S corporation owner that owns more than 50%, Christine. I think there's some questions about, who we exclude from that. And I just want to clarify that we're just excluding the 50% owner's wages, not that they can't take the credit. Is that right?
That's correct, Leslie. If you have a corporation where the owners are going to be excluded from taking the credit because they have over 50% ownership or attributed to fit over 50% ownership, that doesn't mean the company is ineligible for the credit. It just means when you're calculating the credit, you cannot include those specific person's wages to go towards claiming a credit. The rest of the people in the corporation, absent any other attribution issues, should be eligible for that credit. So I apologize if that was not clear earlier.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a great clarification because we have so many people that meet that definition. Well, that went really fast, and unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. So I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank our moderators who have been live with us, and we want to thank you for your engagement and all of your questions. we do encourage you to register and to continue to engage with us because we absolutely love having this dialogue with you. We will see you after the 4th of July holiday, but until then, please stay safe and healthy and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.